I've mentioned many times that we launched Vinwiki as an app about a year before we ever thought about turning on a camera and making some YouTube videos, and to be honest, that never would have happened if it hadn't been for Rob Ferretti. I've known Rob for years prior, but he was coming to Atlanta early in 2017 and he asked if he could drive my manual LP640, and he made a video about how the Mercy was the last kind of misunderstood, way too cheap Lamborghini, and obviously I thought he was right, and history has proven that to be the case. And he did an amazing job, even without me asking, of explaining exactly what the Vinwiki app was, that you could tell the story of your car, document it to add value down the road, tell something about a car you know something about, build lists and things like that. And overnight, we gained about 500 users, which at the time was just earth-shattering for us after spending so long just trying to evangelize this idea and promote this app that we had built. And so learning that it was really the best place for us to advertise motivated me to start the YouTube channel about a month and a half later, to be quite honest. And so if it hadn't been for Rob, I wouldn't be sitting here today, and I cannot thank him enough for that. I also can't thank AutoTempest enough for now entering their 5th year of sponsoring the Vinwiki YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out AutoTempest, please do right now. It is literally the best place to search for a used car. And since it's gotten harder than ever to shop for a used car with values on the rise and inventory levels low, now's the perfect time to try out AutoTempest for the first time. Even if you're not in the market and you know someone who is, point them towards AutoTempest, because supporting them is what makes things like Vinwiki and CarTrek possible. They search all the major listing sites at one time. It's the most powerful way to shop for a pre-owned car, and it's where I start every single morning. So be sure to check them out at the link in the description below and thank them for their support of Vinwiki. But now, here are Rob Ferretti's top 10 car stories.
My license is scheduled to be suspended that day. I'm like, uh-oh. Matt Farah from the Smoking Tire and I are friends, and I'm like, Matt, you want to do the bull run with me? I'm gonna buy a car. I don't know what it's gonna be yet, but I'll buy a car, and we'll pick it up in Vegas and we'll drive it to Miami. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'm down. So he and I, we split the cost of the rally, and I go out and I'm like, oh, what do you think of the Cobra R? I've always liked the 2000 Cobra R. I had these model cars, like the 1/18th scale model cars, and the Cobra R was always one of those, yeah, that's pretty cool. And finally, I ran into an opportunity where I could buy one, and I found one in California. I had it inspected, and I went to an SVT dealer in Vegas, and I had them swap the brakes, change the fluids, do the whole 9 yards to make sure that car, I'm like, look, I'm picking this car up, and I'm driving it across the country, so just make sure everything is right. They didn't know how to bleed the brakes properly, and that was sort of a problem, and they're like, we got it the best we could. And so I get into the parking lot and it was like, whoa, super spongy. The Cobra R has a difficult brake system to bleed. So they weren't able to bleed it very well. Luckily, as we went along for the first day or two, the air bubbles worked themselves out and the brake pedal got much better. But it was very, very sketchy. Legitimately worried if I was going to stop or hit the car in front of me. The Cobra R has no air conditioning. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty badass, Matt. That's a head turner right there. We got no air conditioning. That's pretty cool. But let's handle that situation, because when you open the windows when it's hot, it's like a hair dryer blowing on you. So it's not a very pleasant experience. So we contacted Cool Shirts, and we got Cool Shirts. And I installed the Cool Shirts in the back. And let me just say, I would trade any air conditioning system on the planet for a Cool Shirt. We were driving 118 degrees, windows down, not an ounce of sweat dripping off of us. Well, the ice was cool and everything like that, but we were just loving life. The Cool Shirts were absolutely phenomenal. You're tethered to them, which is an interesting thing. And Matt screwed up by shutting the door while he was tethered and broke the connection. But Cool Shirts was very cool, and we duct taped it, and it was leaking a little bit, but they overnighted him a new connection to the next hotel, so he survived the rest of the trip. But a tremendous amount of fun. I was so focused on getting the car, I didn't think to check on my license. And I remember I got a letter from the DMV at the time, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're going to suspend my license. Well, I'll get to that later. So as I'm going through my backpack and everything before the trip, it's 1:30 in Vegas, which is 3 hours behind East Coast time. And I see that my license is scheduled to be suspended that day. I'm like, uh-oh. So I call them up. I call the DMV. It's 1:30. So 4:30, DMV time. And dealing with people at the DMV or the post office is probably the last thing you ever want to do. I mean, there are so many ways I'd rather hurt myself than have to go interact with anyone at the DMV. I call them up. I'm like, hey, I got to talk to somebody. It says my license is going to be suspended today. I know it's late, and I just need to get an extension on this till for a week or 2 weeks. I'll come over and we'll I want to appeal it. Sure enough, the person's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have to put you through to another department. This is after I did the hold for 20 minutes, and I get somebody on the phone. It's now 2:03, which is 5:03 East Coast time, and it was an East Coast DMV. And I'm like, look, guys, like, don't transfer me, because like if you transfer me and like something happens, like I need my license. I'm stuck in the middle of the country. I'm driving on a road trip. I can't have a suspended license. And they're like, oh, well, we got to transfer. We can't help you. We got to transfer you to this department. Transfers it over, and it disconnects. I was like, oh no, call back immediately. Hello, thank you for calling the DMV. Our offices are currently closed. And we're like, oh. So now I've got the car set up. I was so focused on everything else. I'm like, what am I going to do? Like the earliest I can now call to deal with this would be Monday. The rally starts tomorrow. And I was like, oh, well, I've got to just send it, I guess. I got to just drive slow. And the problem with the rallies is that you'll get pulled over just for having stickers. Like on that rally, I got pulled over in Texas for doing 46 and a 45. I can't modulate the throttle well enough on an analog speedometer to know whether I'm doing 46 or 45. So to get pulled over for that, you're getting pulled over for having stickers. And that was my big concern. So I was like, you know what, Matt, we're just going to chill for the first like 2 days. And we're just going to get to where we're going. We're not going to speed, which doesn't happen in the middle of the desert in a car that I just got that I was super excited to drive. And sure enough, we're driving, and the first day we're going into one of these checkpoints, and it's a little like slow 25-mile-an-hour road. We're doing like 32, 35, whatever it is. The dips and everything. Oh, this is fun. Cop coming the other way. Boom. Pulls us over. And like Matt's a big dude, so there's no way we're doing the Chinese switch like while the cop is like pulling behind us. We knew something that he didn't, which is that my license was suspended. And I had the letter, and I was going to be like, oh, here's the letter. It just got suspended, but I called it in. Did they not correct that? I don't know. Like, you know what? I'll let Matt drive. And that was our backup plan. But plan A was to talk our way out of it. And this guy comes up, and he's like sort of a dick, but we get him down a little bit. We're like, hey, what's going on? How are you? You got your papers? Oh, dude, these roads are amazing. How fast were we going? Oh, really? We're doing 35 and a 25. Sorry, we didn't know. Oh, those other guys coming through. That's why we're driving super slow. We're like literally like trying to obey the speed limit. That's why they're all probably done having lunch. We're just casually coming in, blah, 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 blah. And like every time the guys, we gave him the papers and he goes to walk away like, oh yeah, like we like, wait, real quick. Where do we go from here? And the guy's like, yeah, cool. Mustang, Cobra. Oh, yeah, it's a Cobra R. It's this and that. And the second time this guy's like, oh, let me just go run this. And he's like, yeah, it's cool. Like, I have a Mustang too. Oh, you have a Mustang? We love Mustangs. And it was some inconsequential like V8 Mustang. Like, dude, that is such a great car. And Matt was a big Fox body guy and everything. So he knew like the Fox bodies and the 93 and 98 Mustang. So he was able to just like lay it on. And then the guy's like, all right, let me just go run this real quick. Hey, every time he tried to walk away from the car, we just like kept the conversation going that we were like Mustang buddies and we're driving a Mustang and he's got a Mustang. And he's like, all right, you know what? Just slow down, and hands the papers back through the window. And I was like, did that just happen? And it was probably one of my greatest talking my way out of a potential ticket, or even like anything that would happen. As soon as he types my stuff into the computer, like I'm done. It's game over at that point in time. So the fact that we were able to prevent him from even going to his car, it was a BS pullover anyway. It was 10 over the limit. But to prevent him from going to his car to run to find out my license was suspended was like sweat off my brow. We went to lunch, but we didn't really document that because I didn't want to have it ever come back to me. But it was a lot of fun. Driving the Cobra R was super fun. I did most of the driving. I got most of the tickets. Matt did some of the driving, and I don't think he got any tickets, but great co-pilot. We had a great time on that trip. A couple of days later, I got pulled over, and this is before I got anywhere with the DMV. And the cop ran my license. I'm like, I'm done. I'm going. Like, and came back, gave me a ticket. I was like, cool. Like, so after I got pulled over and got a ticket and did not get hauled away, I know it was definitely suspended in its home state. I don't know if it made its way through the system, but ultimately I'm like, look, if it's just only suspended there, hallelujah, I will happily go and drive this rally the rest of the way. And we did. We got a handful of tickets. We had a good time. The cool shirts were well worth it. I ultimately sold that car because a big problem is that the front splitter, which makes it look really cool, isn't functional. It breaks apart at speed. And like the first time I took it over to 100, the front end's bouncing up and down. I'm like, what is going on here? And it's because of that air dam is like flexible and everything like that. And it ended up breaking apart on me, and we ended up like bolting it back together and zip tying it and doing whatever we could to keep this thing together. And it was sometimes if you hit the wind just right, you're pretty stable. And then at 130, you start bouncing. And for a car that does 155, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be bouncing up and down. So ultimately, we took it off, and the car was sort of flawless from there. But it then looks like a V6 Mustang. So ultimately, the fact that I couldn't drive it with the front splitter on, and I couldn't fix that solution, I wasn't going to go custom mold my own. I just sold the car. It actually turned out pretty well. I think maybe it cost me $3,000 to own that for a year or two, which is great. It was a fun trip. I wouldn't suggest going on a rally with a suspended license. I did that, and luckily I was able to live to tell the tale without going behind bars. Imagine driving down the road and just jacking the wheel hard right. What's going to happen to your car? So being a car guy, there are certain cars that are just out of reach, right? It's just like the hypercars, the Jaguar XJ220s, the Carrera GTs, cars that you know exist, you see them out there, but the odds of somebody just saying, here you go, kid, you have a good time. That's just, the McLaren F1 is a perfect example. I will never drive one. I can't fathom, I've wrapped my head around 15 different scenarios in which like maybe it's possible, but none of those seem very likely. Very, very low probability of that happening. Another car that exists like that I was super lucky to even be able to drive, and it was almost like a dream come true, was the Koenigsegg. And now Koenigsegg, for all of you that don't know, how do you not know Koenigsegg? Like, I'm almost embarrassed for you. If you don't know Koenigsegg, go watch a cooking channel right now. Stop telling people you like cars, because the Koenigsegg's are probably, to me, the pinnacle of automotive technology. They are so well built. They are such good performing, good looking, and I want to say technologically advanced vehicles. And from a small company, puts most of these larger companies to shame. Now, you have to compare Koenigsegg to like a Celine, because same thing, small company, US versus whatever. But then you realize that the Koenigsegg's are world-class vehicles that perform at the highest level with the top fit and finish. Everything about the car, like, and I remember being at the factory where they were, for the 1-to-1, they were changing the sun visor to save like 4 grams. And I'm like, who even thinks about that? Like, you'd either take the sun visor out. Who thinks about how they can re-engineer a sun visor to save 4 grams? That's cost you $30,000 to shave 4 grams off your car. And to me, that was astonishing, but it just paints the photo of just how well engineered and designed these cars are. And Koenigsegg is a company that, like, I can only imagine the amount of wealth Christian von Koenigsegg would have and how much success he'd have if he didn't like cars. Because all this technology, the free valve technology, all this stuff that they're doing, it's almost like the Formula One car, how it trickles down to street cars. His cars, he can trickle down the technology to all these trucks and other vehicles to actually make the planet a better, cleaner, and more efficient place. And that's astonishing from somebody who's designing hypercars, because a lot of hypercars are just like, all right, make it look cool, stuff a whole bunch of horsepower in it, and let's go see if we can set a record. Nobody cares if it gets 4 miles to the gallon or anything like that. But Koenigsegg, they engineer everything to this nth degree, and they just build like absolutely mind-numbingly gorgeous and well-built cars. And here I had a chance when I was filming my Super Speeders DVD series to go out and visit the factory. And I was super excited. It was Matt Farah and myself went out there. And we got not only to drive in a Koenigsegg, but to actually drive a Koenigsegg to the point where we're like a private runway. Like there is not like, all right, let's go around the block. Just be careful. Watch out for that bump over there. This was a completely different experience. We're over there and they pull out this Koenigsegg Agera R, and it's got like test vehicle written on the front bumper and everything like that. It was really cool. And we couldn't say it at the time when we were filming, but it actually had most of the bits from the 1-to-1 in it. So it was like a wolf in sheep's clothing. So we're effectively driving a Koenigsegg 1-to-1, obviously not with the same rear wing or anything like that, but we're driving this, and not only on the street, but we're driving it on a runway, a shut down runway. And here we are zipping back and forth. And it's funny, this runway also has like a motorcycle training course on the side. So here you got these guys like going around cones on their little motorcycle, and we're ripping back and forth at 300 kilometers an hour. It's 186 miles an hour that we're going back and forth up and down this runway. And it was just amazing. And now where you normally do a test drive and it's like, oh, you little American people that you don't know how to drive or anything like that, they're doing stuff like, all right, we'll bring it up to 300, then take your hands off the wheel and just full brake. And I'm like, no, I can't afford this car. Like, I can't, like, and I get it. Like, the car can do it, right? And that's just a testament to how well these cars are engineered. He wouldn't tell a random guy to do 190 miles an hour and just jam on the brakes without holding the steering wheel. Anything can happen. You can like blow out a tire. I mean, you name it. And then you're spinning off. It's almost too late to correct it. But the fact that they've got so much confidence in these cars that you can do that, it was astonishing to me. And then he's like, all right, now like flip the wheel. And I'm like, no, I'm not flipping the wheel. Like I'm doing 80 miles an hour. If I flip the wheel, I'm up on my roof, like in my car. So he goes out and does this. And Robert was the guy's name, who was a test driver at the time. And he's like, oh, let me do this. And he's like, look, I can't make the car lose control. And she's like, okay, yeah, but you're only doing 60. He's like, oh, we could do 100. And he's like full throttle, opposite lock, opposite lock, opposite lock. And the car just, it wags back and forth, but it doesn't lose control. And I'm just looking and I'm like, every other car would have smashed 5 times in the amount of time that, or just anything close to that. Imagine driving down the road and just jacking the wheel hard right. What's going to happen to your car? You're looping out, you're hitting something, you're flipping on your roof. I mean, there's 100 things that can happen to your car. Especially, that's just one correction. Imagine going full lock both ways, and the car just sort of dances down the road. And that was just something we looked and we're like, that just happened. And that was amazing. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget when Christian, it was great, Christian ordered us pizzas. And very nice thing to do. A bunch of guys from New York, let's get some pizzas. Swedish pizza, not the same as New York pizza. Like, you got to learn, like, there's things. Now, they love their pizza. And, like, anytime you go somewhere and somebody orders food, they're trying to show off. And I don't think he's like, this is, like, the best Swedish food on the planet. But he brought in pizzas. And in Sweden, they do, like, coleslaw on their pizza. And he just got a bunch of pizzas. And, like, normally I would be like, all right, there's a bunch of people I don't know. 6 plain pies, please. And he came in and he's like, all right, this one's got like meats on it. And it was just so much like weird. There was like pineapple pizzas and like stuff that like, why would you put that on the pizza? And then on top of that, then they put the coleslaw on top of all that, which I don't think I ate too much. I think I picked out like the meat pizza, which seemed to be the safest play. But it was very cool. It just shows you, I mean, anytime you go anywhere, you go to Kansas and somebody's like, oh, you're from New York? We got this Italian place. Let me bring you over there. And it's like, I get it, man. It's just not like, I get it. I applaud the effort. Let's go get a burger. Nobody screws up burgers. But I do remember that it was a very memorable trip. Just grabbing a full blown, and like if you've ever picked up a wheel before, you pick up a wheel, it's pretty heavy. Here you're picking up these carbon fiber wheels with one hand and you're like, oh wow, this is a 21-inch rim. And you're just like, you can sort of throw it up and down with one hand. And it's amazing the amount of technology that went into these. Now, Koenigsegg is one of those cars that has also morphed over the years. It's almost like a Porsche in that it's effectively the same thing that has become better as time has gone on. And it's such a dialed in point. And the max that they were able to get was the Agera RS and then the 1-to-1. And that was the pinnacle of what that platform was able to achieve. And that's when they switched over to then the Regera and then now the Gamera. And they just put together a fantastic line of cars. I was super lucky to be able to drive that. That car has since set the world speed record at 277 miles an hour. I believe that still stands to this day. We can talk about the SSE Tuatara, but I don't think that record was the torch has not been passed yet. We'll see what time says about that and what the next run ends up putting out. But to me, Koenigsegg is the end all of performance cars, and I was super lucky to be able to drive it. To say that it's a goal to own one, I can't fathom the amount of wealth that I would have to amass to justify buying one. Because I know they're reliable, they come with warranties, it's well engineered, but just the fact that to stick, just say $3 million into a car, when I can think about how many other cars I could buy for $3 million, I might pick your garage. You're like, all right, you got a garage, pick 10 cars for $3 million. That's a pretty epic garage. I mean, you're talking about serious fun cars, 4GTs, GT3s. I mean, all of my favorite cars, 488s, 458s. You get the Murcielagos. You get all these cars together, or you could take that one car. I don't see a Koenigsegg ever being in my future. I see it always as being a dream car. My buddy just ordered 2 of them, so maybe I'll get to drive his. But I do not ever see owning a Koenigsegg, and that's probably the closest I'm going to get to being able to rage around in a Koenigsegg, and it was all with the blessing of Christian himself. The most money I've lost in my life in 6 months on a car. So running an exotic car rental company, Gotham Dream Cars, for 15 years, we had a pretty expansive fleet. And at our peak, we've had about 35 cars at a time. I've got experience mainly with like Land Rovers, Bentleys, Mercedes, BMW, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Aston Martin, McLaren, not so much Alfa Romeo, not so much Lotus, but that's just because there's not a lot of market demand for them. And we generally see between 15 and 20,000 miles per car per year when we're cranking out. So, I mean, just doing that, we've seen, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 plus million miles applied to luxury and exotic cars. Now, whereas every car forum would be fitted with experts as to why the Pinto is the most reliable and best performing car on the planet, I am sufficiently qualified to take an objective view of many different platforms and tell people what cars are genuinely good and what cars are enthusiast cars, which they may think are good, but are not. I can tell you with good certainty that there is a fairly major shift in like 2010 where cars became significantly more reliable, especially Lamborghinis and Ferraris. It's good and bad in that it's bad if you are counting on aftermarket service, but the quality, the caliber, the cars across the board got much better, with the exception of Aston Martin, because they're just still meh. But I have yet to encounter real horror stories as far as Ferrari and Lamborghini go. They've gotten much better, even with the Aventadors. They've gotten better when you compare it to a Diablo, the maintenance of a Diablo, the maintenance of a Murcielago. As they get along, they just make the cars better, so you don't have to be afraid to purchase them. And Aston Martin is just not one of my favorite brands just because of the way it drives. And Aston Martin is generally a car I tell people to steer clear of, or lease. You can get a great lease on an Aston Martin. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean you might not like it, but you can get a great lease on like an Aston Martin for $1,500 a month with no money down probably. And you'll be very happy with that. Like you'll get it, you'll enjoy it, you'll know why you don't need an Aston Martin long term. And you just have to adapt your driving to the abilities of the car versus the car far exceeding your abilities as a driver, which I think a lot of the modern day sports cars generally do, is they far exceed most people's abilities as a driver. And if you push to see where that intersection point is, it usually ends with a wall or a tree. You have other brands like McLaren. Now, McLaren is a real touchy one because McLaren can get you in a couple of ways. It can get you on out of warranty service, or it can get you on depreciation. So you don't want to get caught. Neither of those are your friends. Your friends in exotic cars: reliability, performance, looks, and sound. Not friends: depreciation, maintenance, especially out of warranty maintenance. So when you combine those, McLaren has two big strikes on both the out of warranty maintenance costs and then the depreciation. And I've lost my shirt on a McLaren. I bought a new McLaren 12C. It was a used demo, and I lost. It's the most money I've lost in my life in 6 months on a car. It was well over $100,000, is what the dealer offered me 3,000 miles later on a trade-in when he tried to sell me a new Spider. Go ahead. Ask me if he was successful in selling me that new Spider. He was not. But then I learned my lesson. I mean, business is about learning. The next McLaren I bought was a McLaren Neiman Marcus Edition 12C Spider, and I got that one for $175 on a 333 window sticker with 1,200 miles. So I learned my lesson. Once you learn the game, once you learn the ins and outs, once you learn how to buy replacement parts, if there are cheaper alternatives for replacement parts, if a part is made by Bosch, whether you should just get it from Bosch with the same part number, or if you should go to Ferrari and get it. A lot of the times, I remember when I needed Ferrari fuel pumps, and somebody's like, oh yeah, those are $1,850 a piece. And I'm like, wait a second. My Supra makes 1,000 wheel horsepower, and I've got definitely a more sophisticated fuel pump system in my car than this. Those fuel pumps are $350 each. Why am I spending so much for yours? And when you start piecing it apart, you see Walbro makes the pump. So then you go to Walbro and you're like, oh, it's the same part. They've got it in 47 different models. I'll just get it out of the Maserati. Now it's only $43 for the same exact part that is being marked up by another manufacturer. So you have to really learn how to play the game, especially if you want to be a savvy guy that's not like, well, I'm selling my car. I've got $43,000 worth of maintenance records. That should increase the value. It doesn't. Having experts that you can refer to that are not groupies. A groupie is somebody that is loyal to a brand, that is only focused on one brand. You want an expert, probably a mechanic that works for a brand, because they'll be straight with you. But finding a guy who owns 12 Corvettes that's not going to tell you the Corvette's not the best car you could possibly buy when it may not be. I can tell you the Corvettes don't have great high-speed acceleration. So if you wanted to build a half-mile car or a mile car, Corvette's not the right one to go with. There's generally no magic good deal. If you see something that seems too good to be true, there's usually a story behind it. There's usually a reason it's too good to be true. Buying something and then finding out, oh, well, I didn't see the crack in the windshield. Oh, that's a $6,500 windshield. Oh, they don't make aftermarket glass for that. Oh, let me put a piece of tape on it and try to sell it. There is rhyme and reason to virtually anything, especially with exotic cars. People tend to overvalue them. So if something seems like a good deal, I would definitely make sure you get a PPI. And if there was one piece of advice I'd give to anyone looking to buy an exotic car, is to have that car inspected by a mechanic prior to purchase, because there are common issues. There's stuff that you should look for that could sneak up on you. Ferrari manifolds on the 430s, they used to be warranted for 10 years. That's over now. And the manifolds, if you go with factory manifolds, which a lot of people choose to do, you're looking at about $4,000 per manifold. And nobody wants to spend $8,000 on stock cast iron manifolds that crack anyway. So with all the experience that I have, what are my favorite cars? Like, what do I like? I would say I really enjoy the Ford GT just for the raw fun factor of it. I'm going to be straight up honest with you. There's not much to the car, but like the door panels fall in, and like it's like stuff that's like glued together that just falls apart. It's just not the best fit and finish, but it's fun to drive. If you want something that's reliable, it's going to be the obvious answer. And I know you're all thinking, if you want something reliable and fun and fast, go with the Porsche. I would say a Porsche Turbo, like either a 996, 997 Porsche Turbo, great value for the money. A GT3 is a great car with the NA motor. and they're reliable. The GT3 I put like 15,000 miles on it. I made money on it when I sold it, and it cost me virtually nothing to drive. I think I made a couple $100 a month on that car when I amortized it over the period of ownership. You can't rely on that market. A lot of people tend to rely on, well, cars are going up, let me get in before it gets to the top. And you never want to do that. Once you see the market skyrocketing, assume that that's a rich person's game, that if you got the cash to just sit and you got the cash to lose, get in on it. But otherwise, if you work hard for your money and you're concerned about it, I would go with a Porsche or something that's 10 years old or older that's in good condition that you can enjoy. Don't be afraid of miles, because miles, especially on newer cars, aren't indicative of more likely to break. These cars are not built with life cycles where the engine has to be replaced every 50,000 miles. A lot of people with like Ferrari major services, 355s, 360s, 430s, a lot of people are like, whoa, the timing belt's going to snap on my 360 if I don't swap the belt. Why? It's been 3 years. There's guys that legitimately will transport, especially like F40s, F50s, will flatbed them to the dealership 3/10 of a mile more than was on the car for the last major service, and then do another major service. They haven't driven it. Why are you doing it? Well, there's this disillusion that Ferrari is able to win F1 titles, but they're not able to design a timing belt that lasts an eighth of it as long as a Honda Civic's timing belt can last. So a Honda can make a timing belt that goes 350,000 miles, but a Ferrari, if you don't replace it in 15,000 miles, you're going to grenade your engine. And it's all these like irrational fears that generally steer people away from stuff, drive them into over-servicing their cars. And over-servicing your car, I would say, is probably a bigger problem than not servicing it at all. Because when you put a car back, when a mechanic puts a car back together, it's missing bolts, missing screws. It's more likely to have something go wrong with it. And that's just one of those things that like people just overthink it. Like wait till something breaks. Obviously do your fluid changes. But, or if you see evidence of like my timing belt is about to snap, it's not going to, I promise you. But don't think that just because something is lore that it's truth and that you have to do it. And some people may hold it against you on the value of your car. That's their problem. You can let them PPI the car and I'm sure everything will check out. And if their only thing is like you didn't do an oil change or you didn't do a service, you can factor that into the price of the car, but you didn't have to spend that money yet anyway. So win-win. The show is designed around 8 cars, not 4, and like some stories about cars breaking. I'm doing a show called Sorted, which is testing out a bunch of different modified cars. And this has its roots all the way back to like when I was a kid, almost turn of the century. And you had this thing called the Super Tuner Challenge. I think it was like Car and Driver, Road and Track would do these like comparisons between like Hennessy and Lingenfelter and Mallet. And all these guys would come out with their modified cars and just go have at it. And you just like look at the statistics column and be like, holy crap, that guy just did 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, which now is nothing. But back in the day, 20 years ago, that was like, can you believe this? Look how fast this car went. Now, fast forward 20 years, nobody's doing stuff like that anymore. And I was like, how do we get these guys together? And I started a series to try this out on my YouTube channel. And it was just a bunch of YouTubers coming together, and it was called the Project Car Challenge. And I've learned over the years, the first Project Car Challenge we did was in Las Vegas. It was Matt Farah, myself, David Patterson, Tommy Effia, and Rob Dahm. And we came out and we brought these cars out, and we were going to do a half-mile challenge and then a hot lap challenge at a racetrack. And Rob's car had some issues, which cars do. Modified cars have issues. And he was stuck all night, so we couldn't go out and do our, let's just say the area of Las Vegas that I had shut down for this is quieter at night than it is during the day. So we decided we'll do that after the racetrack. And that's when I learned that you can't do the hard stuff first because the cars aren't going to make it. My car caught fire. Good times, because that's what it was supposed to do. For YouTube, that's excellent. If you're going to catch fire, you want to catch fire at a racetrack, because you had a guy right over there with a fire extinguisher right quick. And then after that, started the car up, drove it away. So that's good. That was the fire. It was more dramatic than it should have been, but it was the protective heat shielding that caught fire, which means it's getting pretty hot up in there. But the car put down some great laps. It was very fast. It just didn't go the distance. And I then sent it down to Texas to get modified, to get dialed in. And now I'm going to try to compare that to other cars again. But before that, I was like, you know what? Let's just do this with other people's cars. And that's where Sorted came in, that we were going to take this thing, we were going to compare the cars and progressively make it harder as we went along. So we're not going to like go out and go gung-ho and start doing hot laps and everybody breaks. Next thing you know, we don't really have a competition because everybody's broken. And little did I know, that held fairly true in some of the filming here, that some of the cars, it's like, all right, all you got to do is show up. And that was a problem. Now, we had over 190 people submit their cars to be used in the show. We selected 8 for the East Coast, 8 for the West Coast. The goal is to then race them against each other, the 2 winners. So we're racing the 2 fastest cars to see who's got the fastest car in the country effectively. Obviously, the sample size is limited, but we still get to shake it out, and we're running a lot of fast cars. In Florida, the average horsepower was about 1,000 wheel horsepower per car. So that's pretty impressive. That's it. That's attracting the right group of cars. So you're getting these guys to properly modify. Lots of money goes in. When you start getting into the 1,000 horsepower range, you're not eBay parting that car. That car is ideally has a lot of money invested, whether it's sorted or not. That's why we're here to find out. But it does have a ton of money put into that car. And it generally, driving on the highway and doing these highway pulls, makes these guys feel like they're a little bit more invincible than ultimately they end up being. So now here I am, and it's 2 days prior to the filming of the first episode of the first show, and I start getting phone calls. Hey, bad news. What? My car is the one guy with he had a turbo R8, single turbo R8, which you don't see very often, mostly twin turbos. He had a great red single turbo R8, getting it back from the tuner, going to pick it up. It's all good. Oh my God, I need new tires. I got to source new tires, got new tires, started driving. He's like, nope, can't come. That sucks that the guy went through all this effort, got it tuned, got it all sorted out, and ultimately the car wasn't even driving well. He's like, it's undrivable. So that one went back. There was like 3 or 4 inside of 48 hours, which I'm like, what is going on right now? Like half of our field that was handpicked isn't ready. There was another guy who had an R32 Skyline, great car, 1,000 horsepower, and he decided to be more competitive that he was going to just switch it over to sequential. Let me tell you, there is no just switching anything over to sequential. It's never like drop in and then just start her up and go drive down the road. And that was a problem. And he's like, well, just give me till Friday. Friday came and went, not going to be done. I'm like, I know it's not going to be done. When you told me you were switching it to sequential 7 days prior to this thing filming, even though you're already in Florida, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Another guy, Honda S2000, Turbo S2000, great looking car, blue one up in New York. I think it was making like 700 or 800 wheel horsepower. And he just got the car back and he wasn't making any boost. So I was like, all right, well, you need to make boost, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Finally got it making boost, and I'm like, okay, good. Then he got nervous because the car was just down for like 2 or 3 years, and he just had the new engine put in, that he was afraid to break it again. And that's probably super telling as far as that struggle people have modifying cars, because sometimes after a certain point, you just get so tired of it breaking that you just lose all interest in it. And that defeats the purpose of this whole thing. Why modify something to the point where you don't want to drive it or you're afraid to drive it? This is a situation where he just put a brand new motor in it. The thing should be good for a while. And he was afraid to drive it because if it broke again, he'd be so like let down that he can't drive this thing for maybe another 2 or 3 years, because it does get expensive. I'm not going to spend other people's money. I get that. Everybody, and I've been in that boat where you pour virtually every paycheck you come in. It's like, all right, food, car payment, everything else is going into the next part that I can afford. And the engine is not a cheap part. So he was out. Luckily, I had the yellow S2000 that stepped in that was local in Florida, which was a very, very well dialed in car. I was really excited to see that one show up. And it was like sort of swap for swap. It was like 800 horsepower S2000 for 700 horsepower S2000. Worked out very well. Then, of all things, guy with a Mustang coming out of Staten Island my tow vehicle broke. Ultimately, I ended up giving him my truck. I'm like, just here, you take my truck, just get it down. I can't lose another vehicle. I'm having enough trouble now that these people are bailing legitimately last minute. The show is designed around 8 cars, not 4, and like some stories about cars breaking. Same thing happened when you fast forward to California. So I ultimately got all 8 cars down to Florida. Not the original ones, but we had like last minute, we had the Viper, which was awesome. There was a Calvo Viper that came down, the Sissio Porsche, the S2000. Those were all last minute additions, and they filled in the 3 cars, and they were all within 48 hours. Oh, and then the RS3, which was another terrific car. He called me up and he was like, love the idea, I want to be a part of it. And I'm like, all right, cool. Can you make it to Florida? Where are you coming from? He's like, oh, I'm in Minnesota. I'm like, oh, dude, we're filming in Florida. Like Minnesota, you're not even close. He's like, no, it's 28 hours away. You guys aren't starting for 37 hours. And I'm like, see you there. And I like that. I like that, like gung-ho, those guys. And they had a gorgeous trailer too. That Rat Hana was the guy's name. He goes by Rat, which is like an interesting name to give yourself. But he brought down this 930 all-wheel horsepower. It's like 1,100 engine horsepower Audi RS3 and smooth side trailer, which is the option nobody pays for because it's expensive, but it looks really nice. But this guy obviously put money into everything, brought down that car last minute. I had people coming from all over the place, but like one kid drove down from Buffalo. For a show that's called Sorted, most cars are either like local or coming in on a trailer. This guy got in his car. It was a turbo swapped IS300 with a 1JZ. Legitimately got in his car, drove it straight to Florida. Drove like 23 hours, and I was like, you, sir, that car, like whether I like it or not, nobody's going to argue that car is not sorted. And it was good to see them all come out. Here we are in California. What happens? Same thing. Car drops off. This car's coming. The one guy who was going to come to Florida, but he's like, you know what, I'll just go to the California one. He was in Texas. He was bringing a ZR1. It was an 09 ZR1, 1,000 wheel horsepower. Sure enough, like a couple of days before, we're changing the oil. There's shavings in the oil. You're out. And I guess at that point in time, you're tearing the thing down anyway, but you don't want it to fail on camera. But there was other cars that just showed up or didn't show up at all. Like I had 2 Porsches. One of them, to be fair, pulled the COVID card, which you can't argue with. Somebody in my shop is sick, so I'm not going to come. But I had 2 like really cool Porsche turbos coming out to California. We ended up with none. So we ended up having 7 cars. I did get a replacement for the one Porsche is when the Sheepy Race Audi, the twin turbo R8 came out. I just can't even remember. I can't even keep track of how many cars we lose because these cars were dropping like flies. There was a Datsun too I lost. It was a very cool 1970 240Z. And it was like full-blown race car, full ground effects, giant wing. Like this car, I looked at it and it was like, all right, this guy has put a lot of money into dialing this in. This is effectively like a SEMA like booth car. And that car failed too. But it's amazing for a show that's called Sorted, trying to find out how well built these cars are, that our fail rate prior to even filming was at like 50%. Now imagine what happens when you film with cars that actually show up. I'm telling you, not all of them made it. Now what's great about this show is that usually like when I make my stuff, I'm funding everything. Here we had the first sponsor to step up. I've had this idea on the table for years since I did that initial project car challenge, but AutoTempest reached out, and as with Car Trek, they're funding and putting together, like they're doing God's work right now. They're allowing YouTubers to go out, be creative, and make these shows. And you go and watch Netflix and everything like that, and it's like, oh, cool, fastest car. I can't get into that. As a car person, you can't get into commercialized stuff. Like it's just impossible. But AutoTempest decided to step up, and they were the first money in for both me and Car Trek. And they make these shows possible, which is really cool. I mean, that's, if you don't know AutoTempest, which if you're watching this channel and you don't, I don't know what to tell you. Go click on the link in the description. But they have it's an aggregator, so they bring all these different search sites together. So when you're looking, you don't have to be like, where else am I going to look for cars? You can just look on one place, and it aggregates and pulls together all these listings to make your searching much simpler and save you a ton of time. I'm pouring hot water on the Ferrari outside of the post office in Dumont, New Jersey. When we started Gotham Dream Cars, we started with one car, a Euro spec Ferrari 360. And I got involved a couple of weeks after the company started. Noah started the company, and I quickly found out he knew nothing about cars. And he's like, oh yeah, you know, one of my customers just banged up the fender and it's going to be down for 4 weeks. And I'm like, what are you talking about, down for 4 weeks? Like, that is like, it just barely like hit it. And he's like, yeah, it's going to Classic Coach in New Jersey and it's going to cost $15,000 to repair. I'm like, dude, $15,000 for that? Like, it's paint, it's red, it's a rental car. You can get that fixed. And now you can fix them for a couple $100. But I'm like, you can get that fixed for like $2,500 and it'll be done by the end of the week. And he's like, really? You got to show me. And I had it done for him in like 3 days for $2,500. And next thing you know, I'm part of the rental company. Part of it is you need somebody who knows cars. And I was the guy who knew cars. I was out street racing. I knew cars. I didn't know exotics, but I knew they couldn't be very much different than what I was playing with already. So that car, that Eurospec 360, it had such a storied life because it was rented. It was like our only car for 6 months until we got our Gallardo. But after that, I mean, we ran that car for a couple of years. And when we were borrowing money back then, it was one of those things that we couldn't get in and out of the cars. We were locked into like a 3-year lease on that car. It was and then when I say a lease, it's not like a lease that you would think of. It's more like a business lease. So the balloon payment, it never makes sense to return it. So we ran that car for a while. We did a bunch of dream car tours in like 2005 and 2006. So the mileage really started to climb. And people started complaining about the mileage. Like, dude, this car is pretty ratty. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That car's perfectly fine. And I'm a pretty like laid back guy with condition, but like from a business perspective, this car had nothing wrong with it. Somebody was jump starting it and they like put the positive to the negative or something. Something happened that it shorted out the gauge cluster. And it's like, oh, gauge cluster reads 5s across the board. So now it's 555 kilometers. So now we got a car reading in kilometers and it's at 555,000. So we bring it to the dealer. We're like, okay, we can get you a new gauge cluster and this and that. And we're like, well, does it reading accurately? They're like, yeah, just reading in kilometers. I'm like, all right, let's keep it like this for a while. Nobody complained because nobody believed that there was 555,000 kilometers on it. And they're like, oh, they thought it was like, how many miles on it? I don't know. It's a couple of years old. It's been in the fleet. Oh, it's great. We love it. And the customer satisfaction went from like here and the people like looking, like a lot of people will rent and like look for something to complain about just to be like, oh, just give me $100 back and we're cool. When we did that, the odometer changed. We're like, oh, look, it's reading in kilometers. We'll reset the trip kilometer. So we gave them the conversion. Nobody had a problem with it from there on out. Fast forward to a dream car tour a couple of, I don't know, maybe half a year later, we did actually swap the gauge cluster eventually and set the odometer to the correct mileage. Then we put the sticker in the door because the odometer was changed. So we did everything we were supposed to do. But it was driving down the Palisades Parkway on a dream car tour and I got a call from Noah who was running tours with me. And I was back at the office. He was out there and I get a call that the Ferrari was on fire on the side of the parkway. And at this point in time, it's like, we're like, all right, let's get ready to sell this thing. It's like approaching 100,000 miles and it was just time to go. And the car knew that. And it decided to set itself on fire. We never traced back the exact cause. You could blame a guy for like keeping the revs up too much or something, but that doesn't really start the fire. Driving it like that may not be the best thing for the car, but ultimately it's not the cause of the fire. Something else causes the fire. The car catches fire and I'm like, oh, I want to come film this. And they're like, well, what should we do? Is bring over the fire extinguisher. I'm like, throw the fire extinguisher in the trees. There are no fire extinguishers on that tour. Like you do not want to put that, you don't want a 100,000 mile Ferrari with fire damage. Like we don't want that built. There happened to be no fire extinguishers there. I don't think there were any in the trees either, but let's just assume that there were no fire extinguishers on the premises. I'm driving up. I'm like, I'm going to come see this. This has got to be cool. Like I'm making videos. I'm making DVDs. So I want to come document. And like listening to 1010 Wins, which is our local news, like AM radio news thing. And like, stay away from the Palisades Parkway. And they're doing this whole thing. Like there's a car on fire at exit 7. So like I'm going northbound, the car was coming southbound, and we're talking wall-to-wall traffic, like because a Ferrari just burned down on the side of the road and you got a bunch of other exotic cars parked there. It was absolute gridlock on my side of the highway. And the northbound side, there was an accident from people rubbernecking looking at it. So you have an accident over here with injuries. You got that, and it just turned into a complete show because this one car was on fire. And I was like, I'm going to miss it. Like, I got to go. So I start driving on the grass, and I'm literally driving this Acura TL on the grass. People like trying to get in front of me. Like, dude, what are you going to do? Like, I'm driving on the grass already. You really don't think I'm just going to drive around you? So ultimately, like, I cut over when we get to the accident. I get up there, and this car is just gloriously burnt to a crisp. And like, the only thing I could say was salvageable would be the like front trunk, but the cops like pried it open to get to the battery. I'm like, the battery's not even in there. It's like under the passenger side footwell. But thanks for ruining the only part of the car that had value. But ultimately, that car that started the business, we got paid very well on that car. I don't remember who the insurance company was. It was our insurance company that paid for it. It wasn't a fault of the customer, but it was one of those things that it was just a wild life cycle for a car like that. I mean, the car saw tons of miles, very reliable, believe it or not. I learned the shortcomings of the Ferrari with that car because we were doing a lot more like driving to deliveries and everything because we didn't have all the trucks and the trailers, or it was just easier to just drive it in and out. And since it was in the winter and we had to keep the utilization up to pay the bills, I would drive that car. And I remember once I took it to the post office, and the completely opposite now. Took it to the post office in the winter. I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to the post office. I'm young and I'm an idiot. I don't have to put on a jacket. So I go in like a t-shirt to the post office to mail out DVDs, and I take the Ferrari because it was like on the end of the driveway or whatever it was. We ran the company effectively out of my mom's garage when we started it. So I go to the post office and I run in. 2 minutes later, I run out. Doors are frozen shut. And I'm like, come on. So then I have to like call my mom to come over. I'm like, Mom, bring me a jacket and like bring me some hot water in a cup. So I'm pouring hot water on the Ferrari outside of the post office in Dumont, New Jersey. It was just, it was quite the relationship. If there are ever the good old memories of starting a business and grinding it out, and like that first girlfriend story, like that car was the first girlfriend. We've been through thick and thin, and it went out in a blaze of glory. So cheers to that. I'm not going to pour it out for the homies, but that Ferrari, cheers. Don't steer away from Euro Ferraris. They're pretty good. There's no difference, really. People like to think that it's a Euro. It's not that cool. It's perfectly fine. It's like a different bumper. So cheers to you. I sort of crashed the car. Noah and myself ran a company called Gotham Dream Cars. We rent out exotic cars. I was an enthusiast. So I was like, we should get some stick shift cars. Like we get a call every once in a while for stick shift cars. We should get this Ford GT because that's a cool car. We had a Z06. This is back in 2006, 2007. And I'm like, Ford GT's perfect. The Ford GT is like a super car. Instead of paying Ferrari money, which at the time was like $250,000, $220,000, we can go out and spend $150,000 and get a new Ford GT. There was one in Central Jersey that was up for sale forever. And I was like, cool, let's go buy it. We negotiated, we got $10,000 off. They just offered it like that because it's been sitting there for so long and they wanted to move it. But this was red, white, perfect combination, had the Macintosh sound system and had the cool wheels. So we're like, all right, we're good. It was a $165,000 window. They offered it for $155,000. We went down, picked it up. We love the car. We're like, oh, it's a cool car. It needs more noise, but it's a cool car. And then me being a guy with a supercharged Corvette, I was like, well, we could make it a little faster without adding additional risk to the rental company. So we threw the Ford racing exhaust on it through the dealer. The dealer sells this Ford racing exhaust, which sounds phenomenal. It's probably the best sounding exhaust you could put on the car. And then with me, I'm like, yeah, maybe just a chip and a pulley because it's like got a supercharger on it. So we cranked the boost up. We had the car at like 650 wheel horsepower, which was like right where that car belongs. When you hear that thing blip the throttle and then go, it just sounds so like orgasmic. It's awesome. And the car itself was fairly reliable. We didn't really have many problems with it. The fit and finish wasn't great. Ultimately, it was not the best rental car. We ended up driving it on the Bull Run Rally in 2006 and drove it from New York. And I was having my Corvette was being finished by Chuck Mallet at the time. We were going to drive the Ford GT for the first day or two and then meet up. He was in Berea, Ohio, and we were going through that way. So I was like, when we get to Chicago, we'll leave the Ford GT, ship it back, and take my Corvette the rest of the way. Sure enough, my Corvette was never really ready. So I was like, you know what, we're just going to ride out the Ford GT for the rest of the trip. And it was a great decision because we had a phenomenal time in that car. I think I hit 204 or 205 miles an hour in that car. And I was racing a Porsche Turbo with Hayden Christensen, Anakin Skywalker, in one of the Star Wars movies. His brother Tove was on the trip with us, too, but they were both on the trip. But Hayden was driving a 360, and Tove was driving a Porsche Turbo, and Tove was driving hard. We ended up racing him through there, and after we got gas and we were out, the entire tank of gas, I was not below 140. We got onto the road, and it was like one of those like last fuel stops forever, and we were not below 140 the entire time. Hit 204, and then of course we got to the stretch of road where we start bouncing up and down, and I'm like, oh shit. And like almost feeling like you're coming off the ground at, even if we slowed down to 170 or something like that, was like, that's when you pull up next to each other and be like, whoa, that was legit. Then we got to the point where we're like, oh shit, we have to start paying attention to our fuel. The Porsche at least knew they put a fuel cell in their front trunk, so they had that extra range. We had to do a dip off and get some gas. And ultimately we caught up to them again, because like after they saw us get gas, they're like, we got this. We could just cruise at a $130 and not get pulled over. They thought wrong, because I was able to catch up to them because they did slow down. So I made up a 5 or 6 minute quick fuel stop, and we pulled into Vegas at the same time. That was a lot of fun. But I had this like love of this car, but that didn't translate over to the rental market. Like the car didn't really go out. People like took it, liked it, but they couldn't differentiate between a Ford GT and a Mustang GT. When you tell somebody you want to charge them $1,500 a day to drive a Ford GT, everyone's like, well, like, why would I rent a Mustang for that? I can get a Ferrari for $1,500 a day. I'll take a Ferrari or a Lambo. So the 430s and the Gallardos did a lot better than the Ford GT, and the utilization wasn't there. So like, you know what? Let's sell it. And I'm like, look, I'm going to buy that car. I agreed to buy the car for, I think it was like whatever we owed on the loan at the time, like $118,000, $116,000. It was going to be the largest amount of money I've ever borrowed in my life. But that car was worth it. I enjoyed it. I had no idea the market was going to go where it went, but I just liked the car. So it was September 21st, I remember the date, of 2008 that I blocked the car out in the calendar. It's like, Rob buying, don't rent any further. So if anyone wants it, there was some sporadic rentals over the next 2 months. And that gave me time to organize a loan and clear out the queue of any customers. Anyone that wanted it before September 21st, we'll rent it out, make a couple of bucks. Anyone after, we would say no, and I would just buy the car. Had like 13 or 14,000 miles at the time, so it got some good use. But it's not the easiest car to drive. We had one customer that wanted to take it but didn't know how to drive stick, shredded the clutch in like literally in like 12 miles. And I guess he said he tried to do a burnout. He was probably in third and literally bird's nested the clutch. So we get the car back, and then the clutch is just as if you had dropped it in a shredder. It looked like confetti. And we're like, all right. So the customer ended up paying for the clutch, which was fine. And this is when we got it before we did Bull Run. The car had less than 1,000 or 2,000 miles on it when the guy burnt the clutch to the death. But I needed that car in my life. The last guy that was scheduled to rent the car was down in Florida around my birthday. My birthday's September 18th. It's a couple of days before I'm buying the car. And I tell him, like, look, guy, I just want to let you know, like, enjoy the car. I'm buying this. You're going to be the last rental on this car. So just don't go crazy. Like, don't do anything silly or anything like that. It's a tough car. It's no traction control. Guy said, don't worry about it. I don't drive like that. You have nothing to worry about with me. Car's in good hands. A couple hours later, we get a phone call. Hey man, like I got some bad news. And I'm like, what? He's like, I sort of crashed the car. And it was like, I was shifting from third to fourth on the highway. I was just merging onto the highway, shifting to third to fourth, and the back end came around and I hit the wall on the highway. I was like, well, how bad is it? Like, and I'm trying to like feel out, like, does the car drive? And he's like, no, the battery's not in the car anymore. And I'm like, car's done. I'm like, it's totaled. Like, why does this have to happen to me? He was probably shifting hard from first to second, lost control, went across the highway, hit this median, spun around, hit it again. Battery came out of the car. It was not the best accident. Luckily, he wasn't hurt. His insurance company gave us like $125, which was $10,000 more than I was going to pay for it. Right now, I know anyone would write a check for that car for that money now. It was a lot of surface damage, and the parts are pretty expensive, like the clamshell and everything like that. But now that the car is worth 200 plus, or even that car with an accident, maybe 175, 190, it still would have been a good buy for whatever the insurance company probably sold it for, 50 or 60 grand at the time. I was like this far away from owning it, and I would have kept it forever. I would have 40, 50, 60,000 miles on it by now because I just liked the car. I enjoyed the car. I wouldn't have modified it any further. I thought it was perfect the way it was. Luckily, there's a lot of them out there, and the guys that have them are just sitting staring at them in the garage, hoping they're going to go up to $1 trillion. And when they don't, and they realize like, wow, I could take that same $200,000 and put it elsewhere, and I'd have more money in 10 years than sitting on this, I'll be able to scoop another one up. So there's going to be one of those in my future. That led me to put in the application for the new Ford GT, which I was ultimately denied for. And I sort of take blame / credit for getting denied on that. There was a couple of publications that when the list came out, I was the #1 guy that like, why didn't this guy get a car? And I had the #1 viewed video, like all the check boxes that they said they wanted hit to get the approval for the Ford GT. I was there. I didn't get it. I had 150,000 views on the video. The next closest was like 20. So I should have gotten the car. I didn't get a car, but I wasn't bitter because like at the end of the day, if I was going to risk that money, I did a similar thing when I bought my 488. I bought a 488 Spider for $383, but I knew the market on the 488. I was more comfortable getting into the market at the time, knowing that at least it's not going to, if it's really a $250,000 car and you buy it for like the Carrera GTs when they first came out, the LFAs when they first came out, the SLRs when they first came out, they shot for the moon, $450,000. And what happens? Boom, they're instantly worth $225, $250. And I can't take a hit like that. I can't lose $150,000 taking a risk on a car. So although I wanted to be approved for the car, I still didn't know if I would ultimately end up buying it. So I was like, I got the highest viewed Ford GT video on the internet. So like 17 million, 16 million at the time was the Ford GT running from police. And I was expecting that to sort of carry me through. I put that in the description. And then the bottom of their thing, they're like, in freehand, in 10,000 words or less, tell us why you feel like you should be selected to the, and I was honest. I feel that I'm qualified of all the criteria you put together. I've owned the previous car. I've done this. I've got the social media following. I feel that I should be selected for the opportunity to buy it, but it's a $450,000 car. I'm not going to beg you to give me the car. I'm like, I've never once put myself in a position where I've begged somebody to let me spend $500,000 before in my life, and I'm not going to start now. Like future Rob should have been like, I'd probably just delete that last line, but I put it in there anyway. Like I've never had to beg to spend $500,000 with somebody. And I think that's why I was denied. I'm going to bank on that because otherwise I didn't understand why. But that was my life cycle essentially to date with the Ford GT. But it will end up with an 05 or 06, likely a white with blue stripes in my garage or once I finish my house and can save up some money. Do you see what you did back there? Yeah, you're in Jersey. Everybody does that. It's probably, the updated number is about 220 traffic tickets. Now, some of them earned, most of them earned, but a lot of them not. And I tend to fight them when I can. But why do I have so many traffic tickets? Well, a speed limit is different in Europe. If you go to Switzerland, the speed limit is respected much differently. It's higher, it's more with the flow of traffic. You come over here and speed limits are like 50. It's been there for 70 years. They're out there specifically to be able to tax people. If there was really a concern with public safety, we would follow the other rules, and the other rules of the road would be much more enforced. To keep right except to pass. If there was an orderly flow of traffic, now it's like cars moving at different speeds, people driving in the left lane, causing people to have to dip in and out of traffic around them. Everybody thinks that the speed they're going is fast enough. It's really, it's become much more chaotic, and it's not focused on safety anymore. So like if I was unsafe or felt I was being unsafe, I would be like, all right, I'm being unsafe. I probably shouldn't do that. And you know what? Probably a couple of times in the 220 tickets, I'm sure I was unsafe and I deserved a ticket. I may have gotten caught up in the moment, probably on a rally of some sort. And I'm sure I've done stuff that justified a ticket. But a lot of the times it's just like, you just get caught in the trap. You're driving along, the speed limit goes 65, 55, 45, 35. You're like, there's nobody around. Why is it going so slow? And then boom, there's a cop hiding next to an inflatable bear, and you're like, I saw the inflatable bear, I didn't see the cop, I got myself a ticket. And I just learned to not care about that, and I learned to accept that. Because when you look at any hobby, you look at, if you like shooting guns, ammo is expensive. Just what happens. It didn't used to be, but now it's expensive. Going golfing, you have to buy golf balls. You have to buy 47 drivers, even though you don't need, you use one, you've only used one. There's an associated cost. You have to pay a greens fee to go play golf. When you look at it as just like when you go to the roads, yes, there's tolls, yes, there's fuel, yes, there's depreciation and maintenance, but another expense you have to look at is just the inevitability that you're going to get tickets. So you can take one approach. You can either go out and say, I'm going to worry everywhere I go that I'm going to get pulled over and I'm going to be driving looking over my shoulder and concerned. Or you could just focus on driving and say, I'm going to drive safely but fun. And if I get pulled over, so be it. It's just a cost of doing business. I was like, what if we can qualify people to drive like with special licenses or like a special license plate? Like, all right, this car is this guy's got his thumbprint. He puts it on his car. It starts the car. He is now able to exceed the speed limit for the bad drivers and then the speed limit for the good drivers that are allowed to use a left lane or go on this certain road or whatever. I was like, well, if we can pre-qualify everybody and I could get like a special license to go out and have fun and not worry about cops and getting enforcement and getting tickets, what would I pay for that? And I'm like, probably be like $3,500 or $4,000 a year. I'd be like, be happy there. Like I'd be like comfortable that every year I spend $3,000 or $4,000 on my hobby to go out and drive the way I want without worrying about getting pulled over or getting some nonsense ticket. Then I'm like, wait a second. I start doing the math, and even getting tickets, I'm not spending $3,000 or $4,000 on my fines or anything like that. So I'll just go get a bunch of tickets. And if that threshold ever crosses where I'm now crossing $3,000 or $4,000 a year, I may think to change my behavior. And what makes it even more unfair is that if you're a politician, if you're a police officer, that enforcement doesn't count towards you guys. You guys get the pass. No, you're cool. Like, you're okay to do that. Everybody else gets pulled over. Oh, but I've got my card that I'm a family member with a cop. You're good too. Oh, you're a friend of a cop? You're good. If you're a cop, you're not allowed to go murder somebody. So you have the same set of rules for everybody. Whether you're enforcing the rules or not, you're all judged by the same rules. Cops have to pay taxes too. The problem is this is enforced only to us peasants, let's put it that way. And that's where I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go out and enjoy myself. And I used to street race when I was younger, and that accounted for a bunch of tickets. That's always like a late night pullover, whether justified or not. Oh, you're just in a crowd of cars, so we're just gonna give you a ticket for, and I remember one that was completely unjustified. It was 110 plus in a 55. And I got that ticket and I'm like, well, I wasn't doing 110 plus. I was literally driving home. Like, it's a bunch of Hondas going out racing. I'm going home because I didn't want to stick around for it. And I waited till they left. And usually they raced on this road over here. They ended up racing on the road I was taking to go home, thinking I was avoiding them. Cops shut down the road in the front because they did. And then like a couple of minutes later, I come strolling up with the rest of traffic and they point me over to the side. They give me a ticket for 110 plus. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I went to court and I like fought it to the death. There was no proof, obviously. I know because I wasn't speeding. Sure enough, I got played by the court system, which ends up ultimately the court got raided by the FBI, and it turned out they were incredibly fraudulent. It was one of those things like, okay, like they're finally going to dismiss it. I've motioned for discovery 3 times. The last couple of times they gave the cop a chance to go do it. This time they knew I was going to motion for discovery. When they saw I showed up, the judge held me to the last person. So the only people in the courtroom now were me, the judge, the cop, and the stenographer. And the cop and the judge went in the back room. I gave him a break. The guy dismissed the old charge. He's like, I'm dismissing your previous charge. He's got the right to now reissue a new charge. And he reissued me the new charge and issued me the discovery on the spot for the new charge. And I'm like, all right, well, let's go to trial then, because this is BS. Like, I wasn't prepared to go to trial, but now I am prepared to go to trial because I didn't do anything. So we got to testify, and the cop's like, I saw him doing 110 plus. And I'm like, no, you didn't. I'm like, what color is my car? You have it as black there. It's a blue car. Oh, what are semantics? And all of this stuff that should get you off the ticket generally, I made the mistake of just being railroaded by the court system. Then I got the transcript, and then in order for me to go to the appellate court level, it would have cost more money and this and that, and I was just so fed up with it at that point in time that I just let it die. But it was like so frustrating that I got found guilty because Ultimately, the cop testified, and I'm like, Your Honor, he's lying. He didn't see me doing that because he was up setting up a roadblock. It's impossible for him to see me do that. Like, and because I was driving here. Well, no, he said the cop is out in the interest of justice, and I am going to take his word over yours. And I'm like, you also know that everybody was issued the same tickets. You have cars out there that were issued tickets that don't even do 110. Like these cars, it was back in the early 2000s. I'm like, these cars top out at 85, 90 miles an hour and you're giving them a ticket for 110. Everybody else went and like pleaded out. And I was like, I'm not playing it out. I'm not guilty. I'm not doing it. And I got screwed with that. It's stuff like that that just says like, look, it's a game. It's a crappy game. We're not in control of it. So don't let it get to you. And that's why when I get pulled over, and I've got all my best cop moments videos, because I can just go out there and be like, what's up? Like, hey, how you doing? Like, hey, do you see what you did back there? Yeah, you're in Jersey. Everybody does that. Like, don't pretend. If you want to give me a ticket, give me a ticket. If not, let me go. But like, let's not make this longer than it has to be. I've got places to go, and I'm sure you've got things to do. It's not really a big deal. You think it's a big deal, but then you get to the court, and all they care about is the money. And you go to the court, especially if you're out of state or something like that, they plea it down to a non-moving violation, they jack up the fine, they make more money, they send you on your way because they don't really care. They're just trying to get the most money out of you that they can get. Do you admit you were a bad boy? Yes, I do. Okay, well, seatbelt violation, $400, which allows me to get a lot of tickets because they all get pled down. The effect on my insurance has changed over the years. Earlier on, when I was younger, it had a bigger effect, but I've never once made an insurance claim for damage I've done to my vehicle. I've been hit before, but I've never made a claim on my insurance for, like, I've never crashed a car. I've never had an issue where I've crashed a car. So it's tough for them to keep raising my rates because of my driving record. My driving record's been pretty clean for the last, 8 years. Even on these rallies, I know how to avoid tickets. I know how to read brake lights and read traffic patterns and look in my rearview mirror. And if you see a gap in traffic, that's not normal. It's because there's probably a cop in the mix back there, so you slow down. And you learn these subtle things. You learn where Matt and I were on the Bull Run in the Cobra R, and we were driving along, and I'm like, this is a good spot for a cop. You come over a crest on a road, there's probably a good spot for a cop to hide as you come over the crest. Like, you just learn, and you're able to drive within the confines of like, all right, I was 20 over the speed limit, but I know, let me hit the brake check myself before coming over this crest. Coast is clear, you can go. Or, oh, there's a cop right there. That was good foresight. Am I going to get more traffic tickets? Probably. I got pulled over the other day. And again, I talked my way out of that one, but I didn't even really talk myself out of that one. I've got PBA cards. I don't even think to take them out. I don't know why. Like, it's like sort of a get out of the jail free card. But even when I get pulled over, I'm like, come on, like, you're pulling me over for that. Like, I get it. If I'm actually guilty of something, like, okay, like, I get it. Like, when I was doing my first to get a ticket challenge and I blew past Matt on the side of the road, I'm like, okay, cool. I deserve getting pulled over. I just buzzed you on the side of the road at 120 miles an hour. But for the most part, if you're just driving in casual traffic and they just happen to pick you up for going slightly faster than other people, I drive a Chevy Volt every day. I mean, how are you going to give a guy in a Chevy Volt a ticket? He's a millionaire pretending to be a billionaire with like 1,000 Airs cars parked in his garage. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, those are my cars. So being in the exotic car rental industry for so long, I mean, you come across celebrities. The more famous the celebrity, the less likely they are to rent a flashy car. Now, Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, perfect example. They were renting for when they were filming in New York for Men in Black. They took Range Rovers, just something comfortable to get around. Katy Perry took a car for a couple of months in the Hamptons. What did she take? I mean, I'm surprised she took a convertible, but just a BMW M6 convertible. Far from the most expensive stuff we have. We have Rolls Royces, we have Bentley convertibles. But she took an M6 convertible. Completely innocuous car because she's Katy Perry. No matter what happens, she's going to get out of a Jeep Wrangler and she's going to be Katy Perry. So, like, you're not doing it for the attention. And driving in the Hamptons, I mean, what do you really need? The only time, like, exotics went to celebrities, and if you call them celebrities, Senator Ted Kennedy at the time, his wife got him a Aston Martin Vanquish as a gift for a weekend. Then Pat Sajak from Wheel of Fortune. He took a Aston Martin DB9. And I remember him calling up, and it was like, hey, this is Pat Sajak. And I'm interested in the Aston Martin DB9. I'm like, all right, can I interest you in anything else? Because that car sucks. It's hard to convince people that they don't want to drive an Aston Martin. A lot of people like have this illusion, this James Bond, like a sexy car, like sounds good, looks good, drives good. Doesn't drive well. The brakes suck on it. The transmission is very lurchy. It's just not a very fluid car. And he was interested in buying one. So I'm glad I rented. I'm like, look, he took the train up, very like normal guy, took the train up from DC. We picked him up in Newark at the train station, brought him over. He took the car, took a photo, kept it for a couple of days, and we're like, hey, you're right. I'm not going to buy one. I don't like it so much. I'm like, I could have saved you the money. And I even said this on my conversation. I'm like, look, I could save you the money and tell you not to do it because it's not ultimately a great car. But like, I'm all for you. I get one of the smartest things to do with an exotic car rental is preview your car before you're interested in buying it. Because everybody falls in love with a car when you go to a dealership and you take it for a test drive around the block and you hear the exhaust open up and you're, it was really cool. But when you get it home and you live with it for a weekend or a week, or like, you're like, oh, you know what, this isn't as good as I initially thought it was. The celebrities that want just to be seen driving around our cars, I'm like, that doesn't get me anywhere because yes, you're famous, but that's going to work for Lamborghini. They see you pull up in my Lamborghini. Lamborghini is going to get the thumbs up, not me. I'm not going to get any mention or any value out of it. I don't see the benefit in giving them out. Like the Kardashians, they always wanted, oh, can you give us a car for this guy, this guy, this guy? And it just never came to fruition because I'm like, look, you got to give me something. Like I'll give them to you at a discount in exchange for the value that I'm getting for you putting my name in the credits of your thing. Giving me a photo to put up on my Instagram doesn't get me very far. I don't really need it. I'm better off just renting the car out for the same period of time. Because then they're like, oh, okay, if you give me the one car for Chloe or whoever was asking for a car at the time, or whoever they were asking on their behalf, then we also need one for this person and this person. I'm like, I'm not giving you 3 cars. Like, I've given you this. And there's always a company willing to do it. It's just not me. The celebrity can afford to pay. Like this guy just made $25 million doing his last movie. My favorite celebrity story is Will Smith. I was working at a golf course when I was younger. This is before like there were cell phones, but no camera phones. Like I would never take a photo on a camera. And we got a call up. I was working at Rivervale Country Club by my house. And a hotel called, this is when he was filming for Bagger Vance. Hey, Will Smith looking to come on and play as a single today? Like, Will Smith is probably one of the most recognizable celebrities out there. I'm like, that's Will Smith. Like, he's a single. There's nobody to play. It's a Tuesday morning or something like that at like 10 in the morning. I'm like, I'll go play with him. Like, can I go? Like, I was a good golfer at the time. I'm like, can I go? Can you cover the shift? And the essentially no. And I was like this close to like quitting my job to just have the story of going and playing around with Will Smith. I'll remember that like he was just sitting over at the thing. He goes and gets like a bagel from the snack shop, and I clearly you're not going to pretend like you don't know Will Smith, but I gave him his space. I let him do his thing. He went out. He got paired up with some random guy, and that random guy probably still talks about it. But he came back in. And I called my mom while I was out playing golf. I'm like, you got to get me a camera or something like that. So she goes and gets me one of those like little disposable Kodaks. And I took a photo, which I still have to this day, and my dad has it in his warehouse. Like he's got a furniture store in Hackensack. And he's still got the photo of me with Will Smith with my oversized shirt and the hat that doesn't fit. I look like I'm younger than I am now. And just sitting there with this faded photo, because my dad's been that's my greatest achievement in life is to have taken a photo with Will Smith and carry his golf bags to his car. Took the photo, and he after I walked the bag to the car, I would have been happy if he just gave me a high five or just the photo was cool. Gave me some cash, put it in my pocket, get over, and then obviously he disappears. Go look, gave me $300, and I was like, that's the greatest thing ever, and of all the impressions that you can leave, to him it was nothing. It was $300, maybe because I left him alone, maybe because we weren't swooning over him, but I still remember to this day, I was like, wow, I got $300 for Will Smith from walking his golf bag to the car, which was literally 25 feet. With the economies of scale, him giving me $300 is like me throwing somebody a 10 spot. So I can see it, but the lasting impression that resonates, it reminds me every time a celebrity asks for something for free. I'm like, you don't need it for free, man. You made $40 million last movie. Like, you can afford to pay for your car rental. I'll give you a discount as a courtesy if you have something in exchange, if it's a Twitter post or a Facebook or something like that. But I don't really get as much out of that. It's not like, Will Smith rents from that company, so I'm going to go, or like somebody's agent rents it. Like, it just, the interaction is not so much on an individual level. And a lot of the times when we ask, some of them were like, look, we need you to come down and sign the paper. I'm not signing the papers. Like, he's too important to come down. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. The somebody that's too important to come down. I'm just like, my employees are just there, not to get your autograph, not to do anything. They're just to make sure that everything lines up. If somebody calls up and says Will Smith wants a car, and we show up and Will Smith's not there, and they just sign Will Smith on the contract, and then the car vanishes for the rest of its life, what are we going to say? Like, that's the part of the rental process that I have to verify the person receiving the car is the person on the rental contract. And usually at that time, we'll get the ID from the person accepting the car. We will then rent the car to them and put the other guy as the additional driver. So, like, I don't really need to see the additional driver. As long as I know you are who you are, and you have insurance, and you're paying me, and my funds are secure, and you are a real person taking the car, I'm not just going to leave the car with some handler and say, like, hopefully we see it when it comes back. So we've learned our lesson. But a lot of the rentals that we do are movies. So we get a lot of movie rentals because, and my cars have been all over in the movies. And I can even use like private individuals' cars in movies, because movies, fully insured, and they're not driving the cars. So the cars are just static display. I've had a 1948 Buick that my grandfather gave me, and it actually was rented for the movie Jersey Boys. It was the opening scene, opening car, the very first shot in the movie was my car driving down the street. It's like the only thing I have from that car of it actually moving, because a car from the 1940s is not like driving a car from today. So it was not a very fun drive in the New York area. Ultimately, that was in that movie. I've had my personal cars in Billions. They've used my 360, my GT3. They've used a bunch of my cars in Billions because it's filmed in the New York area. It's funny, some of them, like, it shows up in like the corner of the shot in the back of like, I'm like, you just spent like $6,000 for that car for 2 days to have it like in the background as somebody else drove by in a Maserati. Like, you could barely tell that car was there because you don't know what's going to make the cut. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, you park my car there for 2 days, I get $6,000, so it makes sense. But other than that, like, it just doesn't really make sense until you think about the enormous budgets they have to produce this stuff. But I laughed, especially with the Damian Lewis thing, that he's a millionaire pretending to be a billionaire with like 1,000 Airs cars parked in his garage. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, those are my cars. Like, he filled his garage in his house, and you got my 360 Spider, my GT3, and it's not a long shot. They rented a house, which was probably $250,000 a day to rent. So they rent these enormous mansions, but they're taking this dude's cars and they're just throwing them in the background of the shot. So I found that as pretty cool. Being on the set of a movie or a TV show is possibly one of the most boring things you'll ever. I mean, we're not talking Michael Bay Transformers where they're blowing stuff up. We're talking being on the set of a show where it's just rigging equipment moving back and forth and like one shot 55 times where they do the same. It's good to see you again. Cut. It's good to see you again. All right, back to your play. Like, it's just like you're watching this filmed from multiple angles. It's boring as anything. And they'll always get the car on set. We need the car at 8 in the morning. You get it at 8 in the morning. They don't use it till 6 o'clock at night. They use it for 15 minutes. Like, all right, cool, we're good. You can go. And it's like, great. I mean, at least they pay well. But being on a movie set, renting cars to movies, it's so matter of fact now. I don't even think about where my car's been or what show it's been on. It may be on that show. Great. Like, hey, is this your car in the show? I'm like, yeah, very possible. Like, I don't care. It could be any red Ferrari. It just happens to be mine because I have a company that rents them out. I ended up staging a raid. In my rental business, Gotham Dream Cars, I've had 3 cars that have been stolen. 2 of the 3 recovered. One was a car that was abandoned in Jersey City. So it was in a police impound. It was very easy to find. It was a 360 Spider. We went, scooped it up after we proved ownership. Very simple, like no harm, no foul. Maybe a couple little body panels missing or taken off. But like when they realized they stole a Ferrari, they probably brought it in. Like, what the hell are we going to do with this thing? Get it out of here. They dump it on the street. The Porsche GT3, great car, '07 Porsche GT3. The Porsche GT3 is probably the worst rental car we've ever had because we went through 3 of them in short order. And it's such a great car, but it's stick shift, which is tough. And people were either stealing them or crashing them, and neither of those are good for business. Or they didn't know how to drive them, which, because it's stick shift, and it eliminates 8 out of 10 customers. And that's not a good look when you're trying to keep your utilization up, where people rent the car and they're like, I don't know, I can't even operate it. Business, you learn lessons. And I try to safeguard everything. Like, look, we need to verify, like the most important things you could do when you're renting a car is verifying who's receiving the car is who they say they are, and that they have a valid insurance policy to cover it in case anything happens. What is the male weakness? Yeah, exactly. So the first time we had a car stolen or legitimately stolen, never recovered, was a woman coming into Florida claiming to be a Hungarian porn star. Well, boom, my eyes light up, my ears light up. She's got features being flaunted. It's tough for a bunch of young guys, which I was up in New York at the time, but a bunch of young guys that I have employed. If you're in your 20s and a girl walks in and says like, I'm a Hungarian porn star, blah, 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 blah. I can't wait. I love to drive this car. And like, I'll never forget, she stalled the car out on the way out, they told me. And then like, she's like, oh, it's good. And like waved to them as she drove off. Rented the car for 2 weeks, paid cash. She said when she came back, she was going to bring some of her porn materials to give the guys. So nobody thought anything of it. And when you're going to steal a car, it makes sense to start with a legitimate transaction, as long as the transaction is anonymous to an extent. I think we got about $15,000 from them, between probably a $5,000 rental for 2 weeks, probably $2,500 a week for the GT3, and then a $10,000 security deposit. And when a customer has a car, we leave them alone. Like, I'm not like, hey, where are you driving right now? As long as it's not on a racetrack and doesn't flag anything on our GPS, I've got no problem with where you go with the car. But after 2 weeks, hey, we're calling to schedule the pickup. No response. All right, we start chewing through the security deposit. All right, maybe they'll keep it for another week. All right, bill them for that. Something's not right here. They didn't respond. It ended up that the car was stolen. It probably went directly from our place. Because then I'm like, give me these documents. Like, now I'm start like checking these guys' work, and I'm like, this isn't even a real passport. Like, she gave you a fake passport. And I'm like this documents now don't make sense, because the old magician trick, look at the lady here while I take your wallet out of your pocket. And that's effectively what ended up happening, is that they stole the car by distracting us, giving us fake documents. We got the $15,000, but then we tried to make an insurance claim on our own insurance. And it turns out it's not as easy as you think. Because when you rent a car to somebody and you give them the keys and you give them the car, it's no longer theft. It's conversion, which is that they are taking the car, and yeah, you can go after them in court. You can send them more invoices. You can keep charging their security deposit. But ultimately, like, they didn't steal the car. They just haven't returned it. And in Florida, I forget what we had to do. Was it when we were up in Delray Beach? I think we had to go send certified letters to the address on file demanding the car back. And upon not receiving responses from these certified letters, then we could ultimately call the car stolen. What ended up happening was, when we looked at the GPS was cut in the car. And that was what actually triggered us to allow us to report it as stolen, that the GPS was disabled. And ultimately our insurance company paid out on it. But it was a close one. We almost ate a GT3 because the guys weren't paying attention. And that's a valuable lesson, and it's usually the case. It's usually not that the procedures aren't there. It's that somebody cuts a corner or doesn't pay attention to the procedure, because whatever purpose, it's just that's the risk of being a business owner, is that you rely on other people's labor and you're not doing everything as it should be done or as you would do it. The other one that we had stolen also from Florida was a Bentley GTC, and this one had different results, because this car, we knew something was up virtually instantly, because they didn't cut the GPS initially. And I saw a car that was rented in Miami beelining up the coast. And I'm like, these guys rented the car for 3 days. Where are they going? And they went up to Daytona, past Daytona. Now they're in Georgia. I was like, all right, something's not right. And ultimately they went all the way to Baltimore. And nobody rents a car for 3 days, drives from Miami in the winter to Baltimore in the winter. So we knew something was up. Then we tried getting the customer on the phone. That wasn't happening. The GPS had it listed as in a storage unit in suburbs of Maryland. And obviously we can't report it. We call the police. They're not doing anything. It's like, it's on rental. I can't do anything. It's not stolen. It's just like if a customer wants to park your car, and it's like, yes, it's abnormal, but there's no theft. There's no crime to be reported yet. So you sort of bang your head against the wall there. Then it turns out that the GPS unit was cut. We couldn't tell because it's reported as like last known location. If it goes underground, it could be underground until it comes out and gets line of sight with the sky again. But we got a phone call from, I would take it as the fall guy, because that one we did have an actual ID. And the 3 guys came in. We had them on security camera. We had the actual ID from the guy. And I think that guy ended up being the guy who's like, hey, we'll give you $1,000 to rent this car for us. We'll come in with you and we'll steal it. And we'll give you whatever. I don't want to assume what the terms were. But this guy calls like, hi, I'm just a good Samaritan. I want to let you know that I was at this diner and I hear these people talking about stealing your car. And I just want to be a good Jehovah's Witness. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? Like, yes, we know the car's stolen. Where's the car? Oh, well, I see the car is here now. And like, so anyway, like, I'll keep like, so this guy was feeding this information. And I'm assuming, oh, just if you give me a reward later, I'm like, I don't like, whatever, like, help me get the car back. So then I started like calling around to like the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. And I tried to get somebody on the case here. And like, I think it was finally somebody in like the violent crimes division of like Baltimore that I was finally able to get like somebody who was like, I'm bored, let's do this shit. I ended up staging a raid at this, like, it's like, oh, it's being loaded onto the container truck right now. So I had helicopters. I had like a full-blown raid. I get a call from this detective. Who the hell are you? Like, oh, we've been working like this for like however. I'm like, look, nobody answered my call. Like, I like called you guys. I tipped you off. It's my car that's being stolen. So don't look at me like I blew some door off. Like, and they found the container full of cars. One of the cars in the container I read on the news story was like robbed at gunpoint from DC earlier that week. So it was a big international car theft ring because the container was slated to go out of Newark. And as soon as that container gets loaded up on the container ship, it's gone. It's in Africa. It's wherever it is overseas. But I was able to essentially take down a car theft ring because somebody made the mistake of stealing my Bentley. Still to this day, I get like that guy who called is in jail now, but like he calls me with his lawyer to try to get me to like be a character witness and speak on his behalf. I'm like, look, I can't control it. I can only tell you what I know. I know somebody called me up. I know somebody was tipping me off. I can't say what you were involved in, that what I knew, what I didn't know. I could tell you, I am not going to lie on your behalf to get you out of jail or anything. I am happy to tell any detective that wants to call me, or I can even tell your lawyer what I know, but I can't promise that's going to be helpful to get you out of jail. You've put yourself in this position and there's not really much I can do. And we got the car back. There was a little bit of damage on it, but ultimately it was good to get the car back because that's another one that, like, you don't want to keep making claims on your auto insurance, especially when it's for a car theft or something like that. That's like the notorious why it's so hard to insure exotic car rentals, because a lot of times businesses don't know how to run a business. And what they'll do is they'll like build up all this depreciation on the cars. Oh, $50 a day, whatever, like renting all these rentals. And then the cars are worth nothing. And like, yeah, we paid $200,000 for that. We'll sell it for like $190. And it's worth $75. And they owe $160 on it. And like, what are you going to do? You've already spent all the cash on whatever you spent it on. The business is insolvent. The only thing you do is you take your warehouse full of cars and make them disappear or make them catch fire or something like that to make a big insurance claim and then start the process over again. And it's loss runs like that that forced a lot of the insurers, like, I don't want to touch this business. The assets are too expensive. It's too risky. Like, these guys renting cars out and it's like, oh, I'm renting it to my friend and the insurance isn't proper and these cars get wrecked, and then you go to make a claim on your insurance for a $300,000 car and your loss runs are, yeah, you paid $80,000 insurance, but you made $600,000 in claims this year. So it's tough. In my head, they're cheering me on. They may all be running for their lives. When we used to street race back when I was younger, it was on the Garden State Parkway, right by the border of New York and New Jersey. And it actually sounds perfect, right? It's like right as you cross into the border. So this is a little vestigial arm of the highway that doesn't really serve a purpose for either state to patrol. Jersey's a quarter mile that way, and New York, like, why would they come down to loop around and turn? It just doesn't make any sense to patrol there. But it was a popular street racing spot. There's the police turnaround right next to the starting line. And then the sign, the big, like, New York State Thruway 1 mile away, was exactly like a quarter mile down the road. So it was actually perfect. You drive by there even to this day, you just see a burnout box. You see all the tire marks and everything where people still stage. And it was quiet. There's nothing really around. There's no cross traffic. So it is genuinely like a good spot to street race if you have to select a spot. And I remember I was out in my Corvette and I was lining up to race somebody. And when you street race, like, you got people like all over the place. You're a spectacle. So you go through this like negotiation. Everybody, oh, it's $1,000 race, because everybody throws in $20. You get people that line up. There's cars all up the shoulder. It's not the safest thing. Like, you shouldn't be drag racing with cars 10 feet to your right. You have cars lining the shoulder. You got cars, like the flood of cars behind you. So you have this buffer from the actual traffic that comes along, and then the cars in the back put their flashers on. So like the traffic coming up sees them. And then you stage the race. You get somebody that comes out from a car that's right behind the two, gets out, flags it, and you're off to the races. So we come out, and then next thing you know, I see like a car coming in the opposite direction. I'm like, this could be a cop. And then he turns into the no U-turn, which is right next to me, and you see the stripe, the state police stripe on the side of the car. And you're like, whoop, that's not good. There's a mass of cars. You got 60 cars like pent up behind me. There's cars lining the shoulder that like this guy is just gonna like go and get the easier guy. But right now, the cop turns on his lights, and I was like, all right, cool, we'll just start rolling out. And then he starts coming, and I'm like, he doesn't want one of those guys, I guess. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. Because like, all I know is we just had the road shut down for 2 minutes, and I've got nothing but clear highway ahead of me. So I'm ripping, and guess who's ripping right behind me? State trooper car. So the people that are still lined up by the finish line see my vet screaming by. 8 seconds later, the cop cars, everyone's like I'm in my head, they're cheering me on. They may all be running for their lives. I'm out. Like, this guy's got to give up. Like, you should just go get somebody else. Like, I figure when I'm at 150 miles an hour, he's going to be like, all right, you know what? Like, Snake Star, not an Apache, sir. And like, the more separation I have, the more deniability I have that you must be thinking of somebody else once he loses sight of me. So I come on the highway. I'm going, let's just say eastbound on 287. And sure enough, like, another cop comes, lights screaming up onto the highway. I'm like, all right, it's on now. Like, this is like full blown like O.J. Simpson stuff. Light traffic. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning. It's not early by any stretch. And there was a car in the center lane. There was a car in the right lane. And I'm going 140, 150 miles an hour and just coming up, whizzing past people. Next thing you know, the car in the center lane just dips into the left lane for no reason. And I'm doing 150, and I now have an impediment right in front of me. So here I was full brake. When I say full brake, you're talking like panic stop, trying to brake that thing into a turn. So I'm now like turning, and I remember squeaking by this guy, and I was like, holy shit, why the hell there's nobody on the road, there's nobody in front of him, there was no reason, because you look what other people would do to predict where you're going to go. Like, all right, this guy may go around, but there was nobody in front of him. So I passed him at probably 120 or 130, like full brake, switching lanes. And then it was just back onto the accelerator after that because there was nobody in front of him. So then I took a horseshoe, got off that highway, got off another local exit. So now I'm like 3 or 4 turns away. And I went to my buddy's house, who was also there racing with me. And I left my car in his driveway and took his Lexus home. And it was just like, all right, we got away with that one. And I didn't go back to that racing spot for a minute. My car was like, it didn't have student driver in the back. It was just like a dark Corvette at that point in time. There was a bunch of Corvettes that came up. After that, I got a little Roadrunner sticker that I put on the rear window that was about as telling as I could have. But they're like, dude, for hours, they all went back to the parking lot. The cops are like looking in the trees with spotlights and everything like that. And I'm like, okay, I'll chill out for a little bit. The next like time or two that I went up, I didn't even bring the Corvette, and then it just seemed like, all right, they're over it. And now I don't recommend running from cops, but if you're gonna run from cops, I would recommend getting off the road as soon as possible, because once they lose sight of you and you can get off the road, it's your best chance of getting away. Staying on the same road allows them to come get you. Shut down the road, spike strips. Like every time you see like these police chases where they're just eternally on highways, you got to get off the highway and you got to essentially ditch the car for the most part. Even if you do get arrested, you can't prove who was driving. You can't prove it was the same car because they lost sight of it. So now maybe with modern day technology, they'll be able to enhance traffic cameras and everything and be like, this is you right here. Another time when I successfully evaded was my buddy Emil got a GT3, a 997 GT3. And he's like, oh, I'm going to come over and show you my new car. I was like, all right, cool. So my Corvette was parked outside. And he's like, yeah, come on down. I come down, and he's like in the passenger seat with the door open and the driver's seat's like wide open. I'm like, I like where this is going. And I'm like, oh, Danny, I'm going out and my buddy Danny lived in the building. I'm going out in Emil's car. You want to like come out with us? He didn't have anything. I'm like, yeah, drive my vet. Like, he's one of the few people I would let drive my vet. And there's this like bus stop underneath an overpass there. And I like start to get on the throttle, but I see like a cop coming off behind us. I start to get on the throttle like, oh, cop, but Danny doesn't see him. And he's in my vet, which was supercharged and loud as at the time. And like onto the tunnel, and like, oh, not good. Cops lights go on. I'm like, all right, let me just get out of here and I'll let him deal with that, because like, I don't want to be involved in that stuff. So like I start picking up speed to like get some distance between me and him, thinking he's going to get pulled over. And the cop, if he can get in front of both of us, will pull us both over. But if I can get enough distance, he's just going to take him. And Danny's just like, oh, we're speeding up. So he just like starts following me. I'm like, oh, shit, I guess we're out. So I'm just jumping highway to highway to highway, no, 80 and then 17, and I'm ripping through, and I just see Danny behind me. I'm like, all right, this is happening right now. Like, the two of us, we're like Smokey and the Bandit. You weren't expecting a police chase in the first like day of ownership of your GT3, but like, it's happening. I end up looking in my rearview mirror, and cloud of smoke comes out of my Corvette, and I'm like, whoa, sucks to be him. And it just like smoke pouring out, and I'm like, that sucks. So I get off, I pull behind like a Home Depot, and I'm like, oh shit, like Danny's screwed. Like, he's gonna be like evading, locked up, whatever, because like the car just broke. And sure enough, he like pulls in behind me. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, the belt snapped on the supercharger and like broke off an oil line, so it was just like a big plume of white smoke all over the place. I'm like, turn the car off. I'm like, Jesus Christ. And he's like, oh, it's like, well, why are you driving so fast? I'm like, you didn't see the cop? And he didn't even see the cop. He's like, no. I'm like, dude, we were just running from the police. My vet broke while running from the cops. We both ended up getting away. We dipped behind Home Depot. I came with a tow truck and pulled my car, or trailer, and pulled my car out of there. But it was an adventurous story. It was a lot of fun. But then there's times where you think you should run, but you shouldn't. And one of those times was when we were on the bull run, same Danny, but he was in his Corvette at the time. He bought a Mallet C6 supercharged Corvette, which was quite fast. He and I were racing. We were going from Lake Havasu to San Diego. There's nowhere to go. He's like, hey, we've been cruising at 200. I'm like, all right, let's do 200. So I brought it up to like 180 or 190, and I was waiting for him to come by to see that his Corvette can go over 200 miles an hour. And we were at this for like a while, just playing around on the highway, 150 and plus for a long time. And sure enough, we come up on like a cop. I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's not good. So we just keep going, because like, what are you gonna do? And then we see another cop up in the median, and we like slow way down. We're like, oh, like, what are we gonna do now? Like, they're gonna shut down the road. So we accept our fate. Cop comes behind us, lights on, and I was a little bit of a dick because he came behind me first, and I'm like, you know what, maybe we could like talk our way out of it. So I like sort of brake checked him when he was like pulling me over, and he like drove into the dirt to avoid hitting the Ford GT. And we're like, oh, we're totally going to jail. Like 194 miles an hour. And it was just like, and luckily I think what saved us here that we got away with only a ticket is that we were going to be on the same road for a while. And the other cop that we passed was so far back that it may have been different jurisdictions or something like that. So that guy didn't come to go deal with us, because it may have been, maybe there was another call, maybe his shift was over, like something happened that this guy could only write us on what he saw. So we had a police scanner in the car, and when he walked up to the window, Noah had the camera in his face. So he's like, "Can I help you with something?" And I'm like, "Okay, that's about what I expected. It's better than a gun." There's no conversation at this point in time. The guy was annoyed as shit. And he went back to his car, and we hear on the scanner, we didn't get the inbound. We only got the outbound scanner traffic. I don't know why. But effectively, we heard him reading our licenses. We heard him reading everything. And when we heard the phrase, they were code blue when I saw them, we didn't know what that meant. But we assumed that, all right, code blue, that's either good or bad. And he's like, "But we'll get them down the road because they're on their way to San Diego and they're racing." We're like, "All right, we are in the clear." And that was one of the hugest weights lifted off our shoulder. We were I'm like, "Here, take my wallet. You got the bail money here." We were implementing emergency action plan, thinking that we were on a one-way trip to jail. And luckily, we got away with it. So that was a fun one.